All right, today we are going to talk about some do's and don'ts when mixing ink. So I've put out a couple of videos about mixing ink already and figured that I best share some advice based on my own personal experience so that those of you who might, for whatever reason, see what I'm doing, decide to go and replicate that, you don't wind up destroying your stuff. So, some do's and don'ts when mixing fountain pen ink. Let's talk about some do's. Friends don't let friends post pens, especially not a Montblanc. So, some do's. Number 1. Mix in a vial. Make sure your vial that you choose has a little cap. I use these that have some degree of graduation on them. I don't know if this is going to show up on camera, so let's zoom in and do our best. And so this technically holds 6 milliliters. It's graduated up to 5. I've measured it. This rim here, is just about the 6 milliliter mark. Has a conical bottom. You mix in a vial. Why? Because when you mix in a vial, you are mixing in a controlled environment. Your vial, assuming it has graduation on it, and this is a mix of what I've been referring to as electric magenta. There's a video on this coming out in December. This helps you keep track of how much you mixed, how much you are actually mixing, and when you're documenting your mix, that's important. So that brings me to number 2, mix in small batches. Mix in small batches. So why? Because there are a lot of caveats to mixing fountain pen ink. It's not super straightforward, and we're going to cover some of these. When you mix in small batches, you are not creating too much of your mix. Having a small vessel like this vial helps restrict how much you can actually mix. We have this, for example. I still have about 4.5 milliliters left of that ink. And we have this other one that I sarcastically called "The Grass is Always Racing Greener Over the Cat Pecky." This is a mix of Wadsworth Black, Racing Green, of Diamine Celadon Cat, and Iroshizuku Tsuki-yo. And I have about 3 milliliters of this left. So mixing in small batches helps ensure that you are not overcommitting to something that you've never mixed before. We're going to talk about why that's important. And it helps you avoid using too much of any ink when you're mixing. If you only have a small vessel to mix in, you're not going to dump half a bottle of $30 ink into your mix. So, mix in small batches. When you're mixing in small batches, if there is a problem with your mix, you're not throwing away a lot of ink. You're able to identify it through the process that I'm going to talk to you about today and deal with it. And you're going to deal with it by documenting your recipe. So, I don't care how you document it. Make videos, keep a notebook, whatever the case might be. Having a graduated vessel where you can track how many milliliters, and I wish this did half milliliter or quarter milliliter. I haven't found any yet that do. I really don't want to buy lab equipment, but maybe I will. When you mix in small batches like that, if there's an issue with the ink, you have it all written out exactly how you arrived at it, the source inks, how much of each one you used, and even if the mix is bad, you'll have that documentation so you know how to avoid it in the future. Next up, you're going to use sacrificial pens. So, this is a Montblanc 144. This is an old pen. This is from probably the 70s. I would not put a mixed ink in this that I have not proven. So how do you prove an ink? Time will tell. Time and usage will tell. And we'll go over that. But this is a Wingsung 6359. This is effectively a Lamy Safari clone, and it cost me $1.27. Well, actually this one was a freebie, but these cost about $1.27. And they come with a couple different nibs. This one has a extra fine nib. There are loads of pens that you can get that are inexpensive. And those inexpensive pens, if there's a problem with your mix, if you have to throw out the pen, then that's not a problem. It's only $1.27 or whatever the case might be. There are Jinhao pens you can buy in bulk for a couple dollars each. There are, of course, this pen. There are loads of unbranded cheap pens that you can just dispose of as needed. So, if you're looking at cheap pens that you want to use specifically with your mixed ink, there are probably the two most common types are going to be your converter pens. For those who are watching this who don't know, this is a converter. Pens that take converters typically also take cartridges. I don't mess with cartridges because I don't have a good reason. I like using the inks that I have in my weird little bottles. And those pens with the converters are the easiest to deal with when you have a bad mix. There's also piston fillers. This is a Majohn 136. This is a piston filler. Piston fill pens keep the ink right in the body of the pen. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. That little window, most piston fillers will have a window in one form or other. And when you look extra carefully, I don't know if this is going to show up on camera, but as you move the piston, you can actually see it passing the window. I don't think I'm capturing it. You can take my word for it. Or don't. No. You don't have to believe me. I'm a stranger on the internet. Anyway, piston-filled pens are more difficult to deal with when you're mitigating the impact of a bad mix. So go with your converter pens. They're easier to disassemble. You don't have to worry about lubricating the piston. You don't have to worry about feeling apprehensive of taking apart a piston filler. These pens are designed to come apart, which isn't really true, but it is kind of true. Your sacrificial pen should be a piston filler. Now let's talk about some don'ts. Number one is don't mix certain types of inks. So they're all different kinds of inks. There are your regular water-based inks. There are inks with different properties. And what I have found is that shimmer inks, sometimes referred to as pigment inks or pigment inks, which are sometimes considered to be different from shimmer inks, are bad inks to mix with. Generally speaking, not always, obviously. Iron gall inks, they tend to be problematic, at least in my experience. And any kind of archival ink. And I've tried 2 different archival inks. I can't tell you what they were because I stopped using them because I couldn't mix them. But some examples of some popular iron gall inks are Rohr and Klingner, Salix and Scabiosa. There's Diamine's Registrar's ink, KWZ, also referred to as KVZ inks. Maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. Pelican Classic Ink series, I've had problems with that. And the Pelican, I think it's a Pelican, I'm sorry, Platinum Classic Ink series, not Pelican Classic Ink series. And then the Pelican, I think it's a 4001 Blue Black. So when mixing ink, I will stick with cheap ink sometimes. This is a bottle of $2 ink from an AliExpress sale. It's a Jinhao generic red ink. Doesn't look like that. False advertising. I will stick with water-based dye inks, usually. If I want to really make sure, like, do everything I can to avoid having a problematic mix, I will stick with water-based inks. If I'm just looking to have some fun and make a mess like I did with this, I will use whatever I have on hand, knowing I'm going to stick it in a sacrificial pen and not care. Number 2, don't leave your untested mix in a pen you care about. And so I'm not going to put that in my Montblanc 144 or even this Asvine C80. This is like a $30 pen. But it has a stub nib, and you know, all nibs should be stub. So generally speaking, don't leave an untested ink in a pen you care about. And the reason being that if the ink proves to be a problem, if the mix proves to be a problem, it's better for it to be a problem in your cheapo sacrificial pen than in a pen that you enjoy using. This is a St. Penpps Montefiore with a fine steel nib. This is a newer acquisition for me. And while this was not a several $100 pen, I do like it because it looks like a car fender from the 1950s. And while I did not spend a fortune on this pen, I would not put an untested, unproven ink in it. And then finally, don't assume all brands are equal. So all pen ink is not the same. Some will have properties that are known to be a problem. Some are very good for mixing. Some are good quality inks that look good on the page, while others might be garbage ink but might add something to the mix when you are mixing it. And that's all stuff that you'll discover as you go through your pen ink mixing journey, should you choose to. And I am not advocating that you do. I'm advocating that you proceed with caution. So let's talk about risk mitigation. Looks like my light just died. I finally do something about lighting and it dies. Wow, talk about preparedness, and I was a Boy Scout. So, risk mitigation. So let's assume that the act of making a fountain pen ink mix is a risk. It represents a risk. What are some symptoms? So I would say the 2 most common symptoms are precipitate, So this is going to be a byproduct of mixing. You're going to potentially, when you mix certain inks together without respecting brand lines, because some of the advice that you will receive will recommend that you don't mix inks from different brands. I do whatever the hell I want because I'm an undisciplined animal. But some mixes that you could potentially make will result in, and this is not an example of that, sediment, cottage cheese-like sediment clotting, forming in your ink file. And sometimes that will happen immediately. If your ink mix is a problem, it may happen immediately. If it doesn't happen immediately, it might happen, you know, short term. So it might happen in a couple of minutes. It might happen weeks later. So you have to watch out for that. If you make a mix and you're noticing any kind of clotting, whether it's initially or after the mix has been sitting there for a while, don't use the mix. Find your documentation of the recipe, mark it bad, and keep that documentation of that recipe. So the other symptom to watch for is corrosion. So corrosion sucks, and you definitely need to be cognizant of that. The corrosion could be on the nib, could be on the feed, could result in weakening of the plastic, resin, or whatever material in your pen. You need to be mindful of that. With the precipitate, the timeline for that, along with being an immediate potential for an immediate reaction, in which case you dump the mix, or a potential short-term reaction, maybe a few hours or overnight, in which case you dump the mix, there is possibility for a long-term reaction, potentially weeks later, in which case if that happens, you dump the mix. When you are dealing with pens that you're filling with your mixed ink, the important thing to remember is to clean your pen. Make sure that your sacrificial pens are pens that you are comfortable disassembling, are pens that you don't care about. And with that said, I would strongly recommend you get yourself one of these. This is an ultrasonic cleaner. I am not recommending this product or this brand. This is what I use. They're not paying me. I'm not their spokesman. Therefore, I am not recommending it. This comes with some accessories for jewelry cleaning, for metal watches. You have something like this, you would disassemble your pen. You would take your converter, you would wash this out, you would fill this with some kind of fluid. Then you get yourself one of these. I don't know what this is called. I call it a snork because it reminds me of that cartoon from the 80s that was like a Smurfs knockoff. You fill this with water, you stick it in there real good, and you slowly squeeze, and the water will eventually run clear, clearing out the feed and the nib. You throw that in there. You fill this, these will be graduated to the line it's supposed to be, and you run it. If you're doing one pen, you do a couple of 3-minute rounds. If you're doing more than one pen, you want to do a couple of like 5-minute rounds. And you can use water, but you can also use something called pen wash. What is pen wash? Pen wash is alchemy. It is a solution that you can make. You can buy it, but it's expensive, or you can make it. And I strongly recommend that you put some thought into whether it's something you want to buy or make. And when you make pen wash, or use pen wash, I should say, you can fill the converter of the pen and toss it into a machine like that. And instead of using water in the machine, you would just use that pen wash. And when it comes to making your own, I am going to suggest that you look up the pen wash recipe from Doodlebud. So Doodlebud is a very popular pen YouTuber, and he has a video from about 3 years ago where he talks about mixing pen wash. I'm going to add a link to that video in the description for this video, so you can just click that and go directly to his video. I have had very significant success with his recipe, and would strongly advise people who don't want to go out and buy it to use his recipe for this. So, you mix yourself a batch, you keep it in a bottle with a cap. If you have like an old jar or something, you could use something like that, and you use it as needed. But this is an excellent tool. So when it comes to corrosion, corrosion is more difficult to deal with. If you find that the ink mix is corroding or degrading the plastic for the converter, throw it out. You can try to salvage it, but why would you? It's a cheap, sacrificial pen. If you find it corroding the nib, I'm not going to provide you with advice on that, because someone out there is probably going to mix ink in an expensive pen with an expensive nib, and I don't want that liability. But it's relatively easy to find some advice on YouTube about dealing with corrosion on a nib, and I recommend that you go and talk and view a actual subject matter expert's content on that. Remember, I am not a subject matter expert. I'm just some stranger on the internet, and you shouldn't do what I say to do, which is kind of ironic to say, considering I'm giving you advice on mixing ink. Whatever. So anyway, if you have a ink mix that is corroding your pen, you dump it, you get rid of it, but you keep the recipe. You mark wherever you have your recipe documented, you mark bad mix, and you retain that so that you have a record that you can refer to. You might want to consider how you document your ink mixing recipes. Use a spreadsheet. Column A, for example, what do you call it? Column B, first component and volume of component, 3 milliliters of Tsuki-yo. Column C, the next component. Column D. Column E. Then you have one for, maybe it's column F, for is this a good mix? Well, it's a spreadsheet. You can highlight the entire row and color it red, meaning don't do this. You could use index cards. You could make little videos and post them on the internet and share your mixes, in which case I would love that. You could keep a notebook like this. I keep a notebook for ink swatches, for ink that I buy but not ink that I mix, where I go through and I do a swatch, identify the ink, the pen, and the nib that I use. I do some handwriting, I write out some nonsense, and this is all that I use this notebook for. And you should potentially maybe consider doing that. And then the benefit of doing this instead of a spreadsheet is you can include a sample. This looks so much better now that it's aged so long. It's remarkable. Hangdian blackish green, It looks more bluish on this page, bluish tealish. On my garbage notebook, it looks more greenish. Use good quality paper if you do a physical index. There's all different supplies I'm sure you could buy for that. When you are mixing, you're going to want to use these blunt nose syringes. This is just literally a syringe with a blunt tip, a wide nozzle. It has a plunger mechanism. It comes apart so that these can be cleaned and reused. I reuse these all the time. You stick it in the bottle, you snorkel up some ink, and you carefully measure it into your graduated vial with its cap off, of course, as you plunge it. Holding it or standing it in an upright, don't hold it, stand it in an upright position and keep your eye on the graduation. Oops, I'm doing this off camera. Upright position, graduation facing you. Watch the graduation. This way you can be reasonably certain that you're mixing the intended amount in milliliters, or if you can find vials with 1/4 millimeter marks, that'd be even better. This will help you better document your stuff. So, when you mix an ink and you have documented your recipe, how do you test or proof the ink? So, the first thing is to look at it initially. Is there sediment in this vial? Is there sediment in this vial? No, there isn't. So if there's no immediate coagulation of the ink, stick it in a pen you don't care about. Have some fun. Keep an eye on it. Check it the next day. Check it the day after that. I won't leave a pen with a newly, even a cheap one, with a newly mixed ink overnight. I will partially fill the converter, I'll play with it, and when I'm done playing with it, I clean the pen. I throw it in my ultrasonic cleaner, and I run it a couple of cycles, then I rinse everything off and leave it out disassembled to dry. And I'll leave it out sometimes a day or two to dry. Generally speaking, I haven't seen any of my pens needing really more than like an overnight dry before they are actually dry. Not that, no, it's water, it's not life and death, it's not going to destroy most pens. But there are, you know, some pens out there that might require more time to reasonably dry. And anyway, after a week or so, I continue to look at the vial, I might continue to use the ink, I might feel more confident. I won't consider an ink that I mix to be proven or safe until the ink is older. So I wait 2 months. If the ink has not coagulated in 2 months, which this has not, it's actually been about 3 months. This is still a wonderful color, no issues whatsoever. Then I'll load that into a pen. This is about 1.5 months. And I've used the inks in mixes before, just not to create this cool color. So I was a little bit more comfortable in putting it into a non-sacrificial pen, so I loaded it into this one. And but after about 2 months, if there's no precipitate, if it hasn't like coagulated, turned to formed any jelly lumps or whatever, then I would generally consider it to be safe. And I might use it in a more expensive pen, or even a less expensive pen that I care about, like this one. So When I am mixing ink, if I am intend to make a color that I want to keep and use for a while, I will mix at least 4 milliliters. So this is one that I was specifically looking for. Let's see if I can get this to give you a look at this almost pink magenta color. And I was looking for something like this because I thought it was fun. But I didn't want to commit to buying a big bottle, like a 30 or 50 milliliter bottle of this color. So I aimed for about 4 to 6 milliliters, and that's what I got. This is an example of an ink that I would leave to sit using only disposable sacrificial pens until I hit that 2-month period, approximately 2-month period. For inks I didn't really care about, I was looking at this. I think I mixed about 3.5 milliliters of this one for a specific purpose that I don't even remember at this point. I won't bother. I will use this in my sacrificial pens. I might, once it builds some trust with me by not coagulating overnight, I might leave it in a sacrificial pen for several days at a time. I may leave it in a sacrificial pen and use it until I need to refill it, and use that also as a test to confirm that even in the pen it's not going to coagulate. Usually when I mix less than 4 milliliters of ink, it's gone in like a week or two anyway, because I'm purpose mixing it. I don't have an interest in using it long term. And that's another value add from these vials. So how do if I want to make like a cool gold-ish, orangish, copperish ink, because I don't want to go out and buy something like, I don't know, any of the Sailor or Diamine inks that are similar, but I want like 8 milliliters of it. Well, instead of using 1 vial, you just use 2, and you add to both vials equally. Milliliter of ink A here, milliliter of ink A here, 2 milliliters of ink 2 here, 2 milliliters here, so on and so forth, so you're doubling the effort. Another approach to that is to mix it. Document your recipe, and then take your second vial, follow your recipe to reproduce that. So if you're in a situation where your mix ink is clogging the pen, your ultrasonic cleaner will help clean that. Same with the milliliter, with the converter. You can use your snork with pen wash to blow through the feed and the nib to clear the coagulation that way. Stick the whole thing disassembled in the ultrasonic cleaner to clean it. If you notice corrosion, and that might happen because some inks are super acidic, there's plenty of advice out there for that. If you are thinking of using a newly mixed ink with a gold nib, don't. I am specifically advising you not to, because if you're gonna have any kind of risk on your pen, use a sacrificial pen, a pen you don't care about. And that is pretty much all I've got to say on that. I'll have info on the pens and the inks in the description of this video. I am a stranger on the internet. You should not listen to anything I say. I'm not a subject matter expert, but listen to me about this. Be careful with your pens. Don't do things that put them at risk. Make good decisions. Approach it cautiously. You know, the 3 main reasons why you might mix your inks are because it's kind of fun, and it is kind of fun. You know, you can mix colors that you don't want to commit to buying a bottle of. And let's be perfectly blunt here. This is about as close as most of us are going to get to living out our mad scientist fantasies. Mixing your ink is harmless. You're not hurting anyone. You're not causing any destruction. You're not causing mayhem. You're just making a mess, getting your hands a little stained, and having a little fun for yourself in a way that is somewhat constructive. So mix your ink, have a good time, keep the guidance I've provided in mind, and stay in school. That's all I got. Bye.